Actually, this one is actually. Excuse me. Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Before we get started, I want to get a little sense of who all is in the room. Raise your hand if you are a developer role, play a developer role. Okay. Raise your hand if you're a project manager or management role. Okay. Both groups, that's good. What about people in government? Raise your hand if you're in government. There we go. Great. Well, I'm Joshua Smith. I'm an engagement manager at Acquia and working on the Department of Justice, Justice.gov project.
And I'm Kathy Flanagan. I'm a content manager at Department of Justice.
So we're going to talk about incremental migrations. We'll explain a little bit about what I mean by this term and why you might want to take this approach for your project. Also, how it can be done, and a few lessons that we've learned doing this sort of approach on the Justice.gov website. So migrations is a huge topic, and I'm not going to try and cover much about migrations because there's so many sessions at every camp, Drupal camp, about migrations. I'm going to try and keep it focused to the unique aspects of doing an incremental migration or phase migration. Some people call it continuous migration. Hopefully that will limit the scope of what we're talking about. And neither Kathy or I think, consider ourselves the only experts on this topic. I'm sure a lot of you guys in the room have expertise about how to do this, how to do it better. So we're happy to share what we've learned along the way and some approaches that we've taken, but really looking forward to the Q&A afterwards to hear what you guys could contribute or maybe do differently. And we'll focus on the project management aspects more so than technical. I think there's a lot of technical aspects of migrations, but the switch to making an incremental migration actually adds a lot of stakeholder management. So that's the different part, one of the different parts about incremental migrations. So we'll focus there. And of course, since we're doing this at Justice.gov, we'll give examples from this particular case study.
So Department of Justice website, Justice.gov, is a huge site. It's made up of more than 30 decentralized component sites and 97 U.S. attorney sites. It's made up of HTML, our homemade CMS, which is sort of put together by duct tape to send out press releases to different component pages. One component uses Red Dot. We use WordPress for blogs, and we use PHP for some database functionality. We had tried to migrate to a content management system a couple years ago and failed. So all of our components have been asking us since then, when are you going to do this? We need to do this so that we can meet the needs of open government and the digital strategy.
So why would I want to do this, or why would you consider this approach? The typical site migration, you guys might be familiar with this. You do a discovery, you build your Drupal site, you work hard on the migration classes, maybe you're using the migrate module, and once there's enough content into the system and the system is built, your content managers need to be trained on how to use it. So there's got to be some training that happens. Maybe it happens in parallel with development. But after that, you probably have some amount of manual content cleanup that happens after the migration class is run, especially if you are migrating from manually curated static HTML, especially if there's a lot of structural changes in how the Drupal site is going to look compared to the legacy site you're coming from. And this cleanup phase does take some time, depending on what the site looks like before and after. It can take a lot of time. And then you launch. So like I said before, a lot of people have talked about this. There's a great blog post by Jen Schreimick from Acquia, if you want to look at that later as a kind of a primer on what to think about for migrations. But the typical process doesn't always work because of a number of issues. One is that if you have a really large site with a lot of features and a lot of stakeholders that you're kind of negotiating those features out with, then you work out what this feature is going to work for this group of people, and then now you move on to the next feature. How's that going to work for the second group of people? Next feature, how's it going to work for the third group? And before you actually build anything, months have passed and the project is already behind schedule or something else. You can also have an imbalance of training needs and the amount of resources you have to train. So if you have dozens or even maybe hundreds of content managers that you're trying to train, the idea of, okay, we're finished with migration, now let's train all 300 people within this week is logistically just difficult. You're probably not staffed in your project team to handle that. So one way to do it is to space it out over a longer period of time. If you're following the typical approach, that's going to delay your launch, or it's going to extend your schedule even if it's planned. And then content cleanup. The more expectation you have that there will be a manual intervention, and the more people that have to be involved in that. So you may have subject matter experts that have to be the ones to look at their section of the site, and multiply that situation across a dozen offices, and you have dozens of people who need to coordinate schedules. Again, trying to fit all of that within a 1-week period or a 2-week period just becomes impractical, and again, it can delay the launch. So if you have a site like this where there's lots of stakeholders, maybe it's decentralized management of the site, so you have sub-sites under a site, or anytime you have a really big mismatch between the number of content managers who are going to use the system, need to be trained, need to be part of content cleanup, and then a small number of team resources, it can be to your advantage to space out the training and the content cleanup into smaller increments. Kind of follow the government modular development term and develop, migrate, train, and do the content cleanup, and then bring each of those bits of the site into your new Drupal site while maintaining a unified user experience to the outside world. So of course, you have to be able to divide your website into logical sections, whether it's a sub-site or maybe you can divide it by content types. Maybe there's user groups that you could divide it, so you have a 4 developers site and a 4 marketers site. Any way you can divide it, this can work, but if your site is so interdependent on itself and there's data flows everywhere, this might not work for you. Also, if you're planning a major visual redesign, it's probably not going to work for you, because as your users go from one page to the next, they're going to get a different visual experience. So that unity has to be there on the site if you're going to try this approach.
So how to migrate incrementally. So we needed to come up with a schedule for all these different components as well as our upper level pages. So that the first thing we looked at was kind of the big picture. We had some high-level stakeholder meetings where we could just describe what was going to happen to all of our content managers. They could raise any questions with us, so we got a feeling of what their fears were about the process to come. Then we had over 30 meetings, discovery meetings with different components, where we could delve into their sites. They could raise issues with us about parts of the sites that they thought would be problems. We could identify parts we thought would be problems, and it gave them a great sense of comfort that we really understood their sites, even if we didn't work with them every day. We looked for quick wins. So we used metrics and just some general things that were happening in the department to decide what would go first. We decided on the attorney vacancies sections of the site. The department finally is able to hire a bunch of attorneys now. It's been a while since we've been able to hire. And the section where the attorney vacancies are advertised is very clunky. It wasn't user-friendly. So we focused on that. We moved all the attorney vacancies into the content management system, and we were able to produce an API that was fed to a mobile app, or will be fed to a mobile app, so that law students can look for ads on their phones. And we publish it as an RSS feed so that we can send out delivery notices. And that made a huge difference in the way that content was presented. We also looked at the way the content related to each other, so there are data flows from this homegrown content management system. Press releases are input by our public affairs office, and then they're fed to different components, so we have to group those sections together. We also, the WordPress blog has to go together as a group. And finally, organizational needs. As we met with each of these components, we talked about their deadlines. Some have to report to Congress information on their website, so we didn't want them to be in the middle of a migration during this period. We also, for example, like the voting rights sections of civil rights, we didn't want to migrate their site in November when they would be receiving complaints from the public about voting rights. So we had to take all that into consideration as we made the schedule. And then we came up with a repeatable process. So that for each release, we're doing the same things, and it's become pretty automatic now. We know what we're doing. So we start out with a kickoff meeting that we do well in advance of when the components need to be involved so that they can set their calendars. During the kickoff meeting, we give them a migration guide that they can take back with them that kind of explains all the steps and everything they need to know. We do 2 training sessions. The components can come to either one. They can come twice if they want. They can come before their release is ready, just so that they reach that comfort level of using Drupal. And then we do migration. We're doing it twice. First to content staging, where we look at how the content is moved into the system and make any initial changes, and then to the production environment so that we can go in and make the final changes. Once it's in production, we do some cleanup initially, and then with the components, we have an all-day content cleanup session where we sit down with them side by side, walk them through what they need to do to fix up the site and get it ready for launch, and then finally launch once everyone's in agreement. And we repeat that starting again the next time. While this is going on, we encourage everyone, and we ourselves, look at metrics. We encourage the components to archive information that's dated. We encourage them to delete information. We really try to evaluate everything before it's migrated so that we're not migrating things that don't need to go. We try to communicate continuously. We set up an intranet site where we put all the training materials, we put the schedule, we put meeting notes so that we can refer them to that. They can go look at the training stuff anytime they feel like they need to. And we try to be flexible. There have been a couple instances where components have come to the kickoff meeting, come to training, and then realize, you know what, our site, we're just not ready. So we can just move them to a different release and just repeat the process again later on.
And I'll say one thing about the flexibility is having the structure in place and having a plan in place, I think makes everybody feel a lot more comfortable being flexible. If we had to create it from scratch every time, you know, it'd probably feel a little chaotic. But since we have a plan and at least 80% of that plan is going to play out, it's easier for all of us to feel comfortable with the changes that need to happen. Now, a little bit more technical, the only way this can work is if you're building a new Drupal site and you have your old site, you have to put something in front of it so that when people from the public are looking for a certain page, that layer in front of it can decide, okay, does this need to come from the Drupal site, or does this need to come from the data center, or wherever the legacy site is hosted? So, for example, /section comes from one place, /section2 comes from another place, but to the user, the URLs look similar, and hopefully the site looks similar regardless of where it's coming from. So you can do this with a reverse proxy layer that is configured in the Apache configuration files, or you could do it in Varnish with BCL. This is kind of the manual way to do this if you have the expertise in-house to do it. The other thing you could do is have a content delivery network come and sit in front of both of the Drupal site and the legacy site. There's a lot of performance benefits and security benefits that can come with that, but there are additional cost. So it may be something that you were or weren't planning on. If you are starting a project like this, you definitely want to consider a CDN as an option, and doesn't have to be the way to go, but definitely saves a lot of headache if you don't have the expertise in-house to do these sort of Apache and Varnish configs. I know that the 3 vendors there have this feature, and I'm sure a lot of other CDNs have a feature that's similar to that. With justice.gov, we ended up using just changes to the Apache configuration file, and that seems to be working pretty well for us. There's another blog post of an Aquaman who talks about exactly how to do this in a little bit more detail. Another technical problem you have to solve is how to get your new content into the Drupal production site without affecting any of the content that's already on your Drupal site. And there's 2 ways we thought about approaching this. One uses the deployment module. And the way this works is however you're migrating, you migrate into a staging environment or a non-production environment. Then content cleanup from your content managers happens in that staging environment. So any typos get fixed, any broken links get corrected, any images get placed in the right place. But that all happens on non-production. And then once that's done, you use the deploy module to lift it off of staging and put it onto production. The deploy module creates a deployment plan, and everything that's associated with that deployment plan will get moved, but it won't affect anything that's already on production. The benefit of doing it this way is that it's a little bit safer to do this sort of content cleanup in a stage environment, mostly because the content managers, this is their first time using Drupal often, and they may have gone through training, but they're still a little green and may make mistakes that affect other people. So if you really want to be sure that that doesn't happen, you can do this content cleanup in a non-production environment. The other way to do it is, however you migrate it into staging, just do the same thing into your production environment. I know that sounds scary, but remember, you have to have this layer in front of both of the sites anyway that's telling this URL path to go to Drupal and another URL path to go to the old site. So you can migrate into production and don't change the rules that tell which URL should go to which site, so that anybody in the public is still seeing the old site while you're doing content cleanup in production. And the main advantage of this is that you don't have to work with the deployment process. You don't have an extra step in the process. It's less complex, and in projects like these, there's so many things going on. Any way you can reduce complexity is a benefit. So we've tried both of these at justice.gov, and we felt like the migration to production actually worked better for us. And I'll talk a little bit about why later on.
So what to watch out for? The content review and cleanup portion of the migration can cause some delays. The first thing to do that we found is to let the content owners know what will happen during content cleanup. The content won't look perfect when they first see it, but that it's easy to go in and clean things up, and that we're there to help them. We formed an advisory group right at the beginning of the project, and we've used them to gain sort of consensus on a bunch of different decisions. For example, how to handle press releases and speeches, since many components post those. The group came to agreement about how they would be handled. They also defined a migration acceptance criteria so that we had a list of things that the sites had to meet before they launched. For example, everything has to be 508 compliant, all the links on the homepage works, that kind of thing. So we have a formal document that lists all that. We've also found that we need a process for prioritizing open tickets. So on our team, everybody is looking through different sites. We're opening all these tickets for things that need to be fixed, but we all don't know what the others are doing. So occasionally we'll get together and we'll look at all those and then come to an agreement about how to prioritize them. And then another useful thing to have is a project champion, maybe a political appointee who can help you, who can set sort of the priorities for the department and help you move things forward if you get stuck.
And we've had instances where this becomes really important. So a requirement that somebody has, they're just not willing to give up. That's a great instance where a champion can come in and bring everybody together that can solve an escalation before it gets out of hand.
And so we found also that many parts of the project can be reused.
How do y'all typically pick that project champion? Is it like the boss? Is it the person with the most kind of like social skills that kind of gets everyone rallied for that type of stuff?
That's an interesting topic. Let's come back to it at the questions because we could talk for a while about that.
So there are things that can be reused each time. So the basic migration script can be reused, and here it's improved every time and reused again. But we can see that it's being tweaked and it's working better. All this information that we give out at the kickoff meetings is same thing every time. The training materials and curriculum are the same, and the tickets put in the project management software are repeated for each separate component each time.
Another thing that we learned through experience is if you want to make the project go twice as fast, doubling the development team doesn't do it. And for a lot of reasons, but for incremental migrations, one of the reasons you're probably doing this is because you have lots of stakeholders and you have a lot of content work to do. So even if the development team can work twice as fast, what about the content team who's doing content cleanup? Are they going to become a bottleneck if you do that? And even if you double both the development team and the content team, are your stakeholders available to review? Because they have calendars, issues and vacations and busy times, and if you're trying to navigate through a lot of stakeholders, I think the only way you can really move faster, or if you want to save money, move slower, sync the resource levels for all three of these. So your development team is moving about the pace that the content team can keep up with, but not faster and not much slower. And both of those are moving at about the pace you can get calendar appointments with that one decision maker who's going to approve the content and approve the site to go live. So for us, we kind of work backwards from what's realistic for getting stakeholders calendar time, and then now can our content team keep up, and how do we staff the development team to be at the pace that fits both of those. Another thing, back to deploy. So we did invest a lot of time patching deploy to work with some of the contributed modules, and we knew that was going to be something we had to put time into, but we did underestimate how much time we would have to put into that. There's, I've heard great success stories that other Aqua clients have used with deploy, and it's working great for them, but depending on what contributed modules are in your site, you may have to put more or less effort into the elbow grease to get the deployments working perfectly. And since that's something you want to be 100% really perfect, because that's what's going into production, expect to spend a lot of time, or at least prepare to spend a lot of time integrating deploy with some of the key modules out there that I'm sure a lot of big Drupal sites are using, like panels or panelizer, workbench moderation, organic groups. And wrapping up on a positive note, I think the best thing that we've learned from this approach and trying this approach is this idea of a learning curve or an experience curve is amazing. And the idea is the more times you try something, the better you get at it, the quicker you can do it. That's true for a person. It's also true for a team. Henry Ford with the Model T had like a 10-fold decrease in the cost to create a Model T car because of the time. Over time, the manufacturing process got better, and teams work the same way. So we've seen that because things are more efficient, because we've improved our processes, because we've standardized, for all these reasons, the 15th group we migrate takes 70% of the time that the first or the second group. And so we hope to continue to see that curve, but that's, I think, been the best lesson from us for incremental migrations. And I think it's a good enough reason to consider this approach if you have a big site like this to migrate. And still in the planning phase, there's still time to try this approach. So that's all we have for now, and we'd love to answer any questions. Again, I'm Josh, this is Kathy, and if you guys want the slides, you can get them there. We're going to start with the stakeholder question.
So I think ideally this person would be a political appointee. who has a real interest in the website and social. In our case, it was a social media person. Unfortunately, she's not with the department anymore, so we're kind of at a loss. We don't have that champion right now, but I think a political appointee is. When she left, no one else was appointed to take that role. So.
And that was one person for all the different teams you worked with?
Yeah, she was from Office of Public Affairs, and she was the social media appointee, and so it was in her basket to look at all these aspects of websites. She redesigned the site, so that's why we weren't interested in redesigning anything with this project. We had the design, the recent redesign. She was able to bring everybody, all the sites into the same design. We couldn't have done that if she wasn't here.
I'll add also, I think it's not, you try to pick that person, but really you're trying to persuade them to be that role, because, and you may have your first pick, your second, and your third pick, and you keep going until you get somebody. Because other than that, you're really just dependent on charisma and leadership of your management team, because these requirements issues become escalated quickly if not. Yeah.
We had some success with a couple different champions on one of our projects for migration one time, and there were two different kinds. One, you asked about, is it somebody who has social skills or is it somebody that's just really high up? And I think you can find it in both. So you can either find somebody who trusts you and is very high up there and believes in what you're doing, and that person, you go to them and say, we really pull some strings. That works really well. And we've also found success with somebody who is well respected, might not be as high up, but can pester leadership until they're just like, okay, fine, just leave me alone and do what you want to do. So there's a good combination of things. But it's definitely crucial. I mean, it pushes conflicts out of the way.
Cool.
Yeah, we've gone for people who are with pretty good buzz agents. So there are people who, when we've noticed with a random project, they do something and suddenly everybody is like, so-and-so is doing that. Oh, I want to be cool. I have to follow so-and-so. So kind of almost going back to that middle school. Who are the people who are going to fall off the cliff or follow?
Yeah. Question?
How did you deal with content freezing? So if your current site is moving ahead and you are in that migrate.
We try to keep that period as short as possible, and so far it hasn't really been a problem. We've
Not short, how long is that?
just a couple days.
And everybody's cool with that.
So far, yeah. Yeah, we make this update in Drupal when it's in the content staging environment, and then the changes made on the live site, and then we just keep track of it. So far, it's not been a problem. When we get to our homepage, that'll be.
I think.
Super early in advance, like at the very beginning of the process, we always said, just so you know, there's going to be a content freeze.
Yeah.
Not last
Yeah.
time, but blah blah blah. But we still had caveats for like if a really important question had to go up and stuff like that, and then just delegate it.
We've tried to be intentional about not using the words content freeze. It's kind of a dirty word, but we emphasize it's a dual entry period. So if you the content freeze is like an hour, but the dual entry period may go for a few days. So people know they're not locked in. It's just there's extra work to be done if they want to make updates during that period.
And we've also encouraged people to post new content before the migration. So like get it up there now before we move it over. So you don't have to do it twice.
Did you have the case where there was a part of the site that was new while the legacy one was still out there, like in pieces, verticals, or anything?
Yeah.
Maybe I understand. So one section of the site is in Drupal and the other section's not? Is that what you mean? Yeah, so I think that's mostly what we're doing. And we rely very heavily on redirects, which, as part of the migrate modules, you can bring in content and at the same time create a redirect from the old URL to the new URL. That's the only way this works. Is the site is half and half, so there's lots of links on the old site that point to what the URL used to be for that page, and the Drupal redirect handles it so that it comes to the correct Drupal page. So we've done that for both pages and like PDF files as well.
So if it was a major section, it would just be that section's index page that would refer, and then the rest just falls in the written. That they experience the new site without any
right, right, and sometimes even if the whole section of that site is in Drupal, the content has hyperlinks that are linking to the old URL. So if they're using the menu navigation, that's all within Drupal. But if they're just using the content that was migrated, the migration didn't change the URLs. It's again relying on those redirects to go back out to the old site, to that proxy layer, and then it's pointing it to Drupal, to the redirect, to the Drupal page.
I think everyone's been amazed with how well the redirects work because it's really seamless. We wouldn't be able to do it this way if it wasn't.
How did you manage to say you had 250,000 pages? How did you manage all those redirects? Is that an automated thing in Drupal, or did someone have to?
Oh yes, very much automated. There's no way to do that manually. It's part of the migrate modules. You can establish that redirects get created as the migration takes place. So with every migration class that we run, it's bringing the pages over and creating a redirect for each page at the same time.
Are you migrating the separate areas one by one in sequence, or are you doing two at a time?
We've done, I think at the most 9 in one migration. Yeah, small office sites that were very similar and not complex. We did that as our second release. The first release was a pretty heavy lift because we were moving all these attorney vacancies into this new content type, so we decided to try to take it easy with the second release and these more simple sites, but there were I think 9 of them.
What you talked about, you had identified clearly when you have people do the cleanup of the content. But at what phase, or is it throughout, are you really having them look at the redundant, outdated, trivial portions of their content?
So up until the point when the content is migrated, because then it's too late. But yeah, so from when we start, I think we mentioned it at the first large content managers meeting, like the sort of big picture meeting, and then at each of those discovery meetings we mentioned it. We've mentioned it over and over and over again.
So when we do the kickoff meeting for that section's migration, we tell them this is your last chance to move that stuff and really nail down, is there anything we can move into the archives? Is there anything we can get rid of? Is there any orphan files that you need to clean up? So anytime up until that point, and because we don't want the migration scripts as we're developing them to have outdated content that we're not going to migrate.
Were you giving them a list of saying, here is all of
Yeah.
content? Or
We have lists of orphan files that we were giving them. We'd give them at the discovery meeting. We'd email to them. Come on, guys, look at this.
One of the problems is always as the site grows, it adds fields, it adds all kinds of things. At what point do you try to consolidate that stuff into, let's say there are 3 date fields that do the same thing but on different content types, getting people to figure out how they're going to consolidate all that into one field?
Yeah, I mean, ideally you can spot some of those early on and form a plan for how, even though the legacy site has 3 different date fields, they're going to be one field in Drupal. And that's where your project champions has to come in sometimes and say, instead of, for example, in the legacy sites, there were maybe 7 or 8 different taxonomy vocabularies, not in Drupal, but essentially the same thing. And we have 3 right now in Drupal, and it's change, so making sure that people really understand why and trying to tie it to some benefit that, even though there's fewer, this means they can be reused across more things, and your views can pull in things from different points of the site. I think it's a tough challenge, especially identifying what those are going to be. We've had a couple instances where we get to the point of migrating and we suddenly realize that this group has a field that we should have planned way earlier to consolidate with another field, but we didn't. So now what do we do at this point?
But you handle all of that consolidation in the migration, or do you try to get them to handle some of it before you get them?
Both. If we've had cases where we try and get them to consolidate or reduce the complexity of the site before the migration, but if they can't, if it's a feature they need, then we make it part of the plan for the migration and actually consolidate when we migrate.
This is also where you could use an advisory group, right, to say, look, this is all the different ways you do press releases. Let's come up with one standard here.
One thing that we did that was really helpful is all the new content types that we were going to have in our new site. We actually made a content template for each one in Microsoft Word that had all the fields that that content type was going to have. And we highlighted everything that that content manager was supposed to fill out. And so that way it was super consistent. Everything that we got had all the fields required. And there was no duplication or any kind of weirdness like that. And it was something they could open on their computer. They could save a million times. They could go through all their different content templates for all the types they needed. And it was really efficient.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
When in this redesign and this this migration, were there any sections of your site that you said we're just not happy with what we have right now? We're happy to just start from scratch. We don't want to move anything over relating to just some of the top level stuff, like how they present themselves on the website.
I think there are components who would want to maybe change the way their site looks, but we've tried to minimize that because it would just add such complexity to the project. So we're pretty much what you've got now is going to look mostly the same, except where in places where it makes sense to move content into content types.
We have had instances where it's a very simple site, they don't like it, they want to change it, and right after it's in Drupal, they totally change their site because now they have the power and flexibility to do it themselves. And in one case like that, one of our component stakeholders was really excited about Drupal because he was going to finally get to access his pages himself and manage them. And now that he does have access, he's been able to take some documents that Department of Justice has never made public, and now they're up on the website because he's doing it himself. He cares enough to make that data open, whereas before, the web team it wasn't feasible for the web team to handle everybody's requests like that. But now that he can manage it himself, he's chosen to go that path. So I think Drupal enables people to redesign or change their site once they have management of it. But we've tried, like Kathy said, to let them do that so that the project team can focus on the
when they realize, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Kind of following on that question, sometimes the migration can be a good point. So you're doing raw, but in addition to rewrite content or to evaluate content for experience style guide or what have you, it sounds as though there was maybe a deliberate effort not to sync those activities up in a mandatory manner. And I wondered if it was deliberate and what the pro cons were, how you made that.
Yeah, we didn't try to. We don't have a person right now sort of to set many standards. I mean, we have the basic federal standards, right? 508, privacy, all that stuff. But beyond that, we're pretty loose. I have noticed in the content cleanup sessions that when people realize that they can sit there and so easily rewrite their content, that they will spend all their time doing that instead of actually just doing cleanup. So they think, oh, we could add this here and we can do this there. And they are very excited, and that's when they start doing it right then, when they realize.
Yeah, there is some level of standardization when the content comes into Drupal. There's one theme, right? And so the CSS classes, instead of being inline styling for each page by page, it's defined by the theme. So we're getting the benefit of that, but I think it was an intentional decision not to change the design, partially to reduce the complexity of such a big project.
Discovery. So while our web and marketing were kind of working on the functionality we needed for the site, we started our staff on content so that when we were ready to start migrating they had already done their work to it or missed the opportunity, and they were okay with that.
All right, thanks everybody for your time, and of course Kathy and I will be available afterwards.
Actually, I have a question. It's a little bit more